retail indexes down over 3.5%. These are really big losses this morning.
Yeah, I was going to say, and no real sign of any reason for them to go anywhere else right now.
Oh, right. I mean, obviously, with the mass quarantine lockdown in northern Italy, those retail hubs are completely going to be decimated for a while. But it's also things like the supply chain, sales elsewhere. This is a global issue at the moment, so it's very difficult to see when when the direction will change. Also, other areas that are being hit today, some of those industrial manufacturers and automakers, they all have factories in northern Italy. So Volkswagen, down 6.8% now. BMW down more than 6.5%. Things like Finnish lift manufacturer, elevator company, Cone, they have factories in the suburbs. People have been saying they're down over 5% too.
Right, just saying, actually, across the terminal, the DAX has fallen 7.4%, entering a bear market, so clearly an issues there. Well, let's focus on one particular stock, however, this morning, Tesco. Now, they've sold their Asian unit for $10.6 billion and planning a special dividend. Tell us about that.
Yeah. They are. So they had operations in Thailand and Malaysia, which they sold, and that's expected to complete sometime later in the year. But they intend to return about £5 billion to shareholders via a special dividend. And it also is planning to, or thinks that this will reduce its debt by making a pension contribution, and that should raise its funding deficit and potentially, protect against future issues there. So that's could be taken as a relatively positive story. Of course, it is hard to tell today in terms of a share price reaction. The broader retail index is, for the continent is down 5%. So actually, Tesco's 3.5% down this morning seems fairly muted, in terms of losses. And I think that story is probably helping to bolster the stock there.
Yep, indeed, I think that's right. Moena, thanks very much. Moena Conium there. And I should say that the DAX index is set to enter the bear market at the moment. Similarly, Euro Stoxx 50 falling 4.7%, also set to enter a bear market. So there's a lot going on out there.
Yeah, absolutely. More broadly, the Euro Stoxx 600 down 6%. FTSE 100 dropping almost a full 8 percentage points, with the Xetra DAX down by 7.7%. It follows, of course, the topics going into a bear market. But look, what a rapid change in just 3 weeks from the record highs that we saw in February, and now we're into a significant correction that we've seen in the markets. The only thing that I would add is that the Italian FTSE MIB is only dropping by half of 1 percentage point. It looks very, very slow, and that seems to be the outlier versus the other markets. So we'll look into what's going on in the Italian MIB in a moment.
Right, well, let's look at what's lying behind this. To some extent, of course, it's been the turmoil in the oil market. The 31% drop in the oil price came after the disintegration of the OPEC Plus alliance, which triggered an all-out price war between Saudi Arabia and Russia. Here's Bloomberg's energy reporter, James Thornhill.
The Russian delegation came into the meeting and said, no, this time we're not going to meet you halfway. We're not going to agree to these extra cuts. That's what really triggered this chain of events, which saw the Saudis retaliate by saying, essentially we're going to open the spigots and let as much oil flow as possible.
And Saudi Arabia slashed its official prices by the most in at least 20 years. It signalled to buyers it would ramp up output to maybe even a record 12 million barrels per day. Russia said its companies were free to pump as much as they could.
Meanwhile, Goldman Sachs is warning that Brent prices could actually drop to near $20 a barrel. The bank slashed its forecast for the second and third quarters to just $30 a barrel. So that in the oil markets.
Well, let me give you a read. 30.79 is where WTI is right now. 34.7 is where Brent crude is. But the all-out price war is clearly between the largest crude producers has fueled the latest leg of the blistering bond rally. Treasury yields tumbled, with the entire curve trading below 1% for the first time in history. Markets now pricing for the Fed to cut rates to 0% in the coming months.
Yeah, meanwhile, when it comes to the latest on the coronavirus, Italy effectively put a quarter of its population into quarantine over the weekend. Rome has decided to lock down Lombardy and limit movement in neighbouring neighbouring provinces until the 3rd of April, but there are doubts over the degree of enforcement. Deaths in the country surged by 57% on Sunday to 366. The stock market has opened as normal. The FTSE MIB Italian stocks are down only 0.5% right now.
Meanwhile, in the US, the EU Trump administration is reporting drafting measures to blunt the economic fallout from the virus and help slow its spread. The US State Department has warned Americans with underlying health conditions against travel on cruise ships, citing the higher risk of contracting the virus and complications when infections occur. In Europe, France is stopping public gatherings of more than 1,000 people. As of Sunday, about half the world's countries have reported cases, according to the WHO.
Yeah, meanwhile, here in the UK, of course, the Prime Minister will be holding a COBRA session, which is a sort of an emergency gathering of ministers and health officials and so on, as countries across Europe really try to get to grips with the coronavirus outbreak and think about containment versus mitigation. In Germany, Angela Merkel's government also took its first steps to try to help companies and workers affected by the fallout from the coronavirus outbreak. It will invest an additional 12.4 billion euros between 2021 and 2024, and the coalition loosened rules for short-term work compensation, making it easier for companies to cope with the disruption.
Meanwhile, what's going on in China? Well, earlier this morning, the World Health Organization China representative spoke to Bloomberg and said he's watching closely the effort to return to work in China.
At least one peak has passed, but this is no guarantee that it will remain so, and we have to remain vigilant. There is no room for complacency.
And that was Dr. Gauden Galea, WHO China representative.
Okay, those are our top stories all about coronavirus, but let's get all the latest now in global news headlines. Here's Bloomberg's Leanne Gerrans. You have more details when it comes to the health situation.
Yes, good morning, Caroline. We'll start with more details emerging about the effects of the coronavirus. It causes little more than a cough if it stays in the nose and throat. The danger does begin when it reaches the lungs. Bloomberg's Brian Curtis has more from Hong Kong.
1 in 7 patients has difficulty breathing. 1 in 16 becomes critical. These patients suffer respiratory failure, and some develop septic shock. The infection usually starts in the nose, from droplets expelled in a sick person's cough, sneeze, or breath. If the virus stays in the upper airway, patients are usually okay. But if it makes it down to the lower respiratory tract, then it becomes serious. In Hong Kong, Brian Curtis, Bloomberg, Daybreak Europe.
North Korea has launched 3 short-range ballistic missiles, according to the South Korean military. Bloomberg's Ji-hae Lee says this raises security concerns as world leaders battle the coronavirus.
So far this year, North Korea has launched 5 projectiles, or ballistic missiles, according to the Japanese government. They flew for about 200 kilometers at an altitude of 50 kilometers off its eastern coast. Analysts say that the launches could indicate Kim Jong-un is at a loss over how he's dealing with the coronavirus outbreak in his country. In Seoul, Ji-hae Lee, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Elsewhere, U.S. Senator Ted Cruz will self-quarantine in his Texas home after coming in contact with a person who has confirmed coronavirus. The 49-year-old says he had a brief conversation and a handshake with the carrier at a recent political event. Medical authorities say those who've interacted with the senator since should not be worried. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg. Roger.
Leanne, thanks very much. Well, let's bring you fully up to speed. Italy's FTSE MIB, we were talking about it earlier, it's falling. It's 2% at the moment, set to enter the bear market. This is Bloomberg.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
More than just a game, baseball is big business. For the Atlanta Braves, this meant bringing a $1 billion stadium project to life through a public-private partnership, creating the Battery, a mixed-use development that turned an underdeveloped area into a thriving community.
Always on the cutting edge of community development, Cohn Resnick advises industry participants on tax credits, affordable housing, opportunity zones, and more, helping communities reach their full potential. Explore more at cohnresnick.com/MLB. Cohn Resnick, Advisory Assurance Tax. Transform your game.
When you went car shopping, you meant business. You aced vehicle history searches and test drives. You out-salesmaned the salesman. Now you've got your wheels. If you manage that, you can get your retirement plan on track. Visiting aceyourretirement.org can help. With 401k tips and smart saving strategies, you'll have the info you need to get more for your future. Go to aceyourretirement.org, because when it comes to speeding past financial challenges, you're an ace. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Influential Conversations from Bloomberg Television. Here's Emily Chang.
Facebook, the social network that CEO Mark Zuckerberg says is supposed to bring the world closer together, is starting to feel the effects of the virus itself that is forcing the world to stay apart. Joining us to discuss this and much more about the social network is journalist Stephen Levy, who is the author of a brand new opus on Facebook called Facebook, The Inside Story. Stephen, always good to have you here on the show, and congrats on the book. Now, a lot has been made of you getting unprecedented access to Facebook employees, to Zuckerberg, to Sandberg. It makes for some incredible color, but you wonder if that access came with a level of bias towards the company. And how do you respond to the criticism that this isn't the inside story, this is Facebook's side of the story? Right.
Well, there were no strings attached. Facebook didn't see the book until a couple weeks ago. I dropped off a finished version. Too late to change anything, Mark. I think if you're writing something about a company and wanting to get the full story, how would you turn down the ability to talk to the people and get it from their lips? Now, I've been a reporter for quite a while. I know when I'm being spun. And it wasn't just Facebook people I talked to. I talked to all the people I would have spoken to if I were doing a story from the outside. So it was pure benefit.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings.
Markets, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app and on QuickTake by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg's European headquarters in London, I'm Roger Hearing. Time for a Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. Let's go over to the First Word breaking news desk in Berlin for today's morning call. Here's Richard Jones. Richard, good morning.
Good morning, Roger. Asian equities are trading sharply lower across the board today. The Nikkei 225 closed lower by 5.1%, the Kospi lower by 4.2%, with the Shanghai Composite down by 3% and the CSI 300 down 3.4%. For U.S. stock futures, the E-mini S&P and E-mini NASDAQ futures have both been halted at limit down, both lower by just under 5%. European equities are also sharply lower in early trade this morning, with the Eurostoxx 50 down 6.1%, the DAX lower by 7%, the CAC lower by 6.3%, and the FTSE 100 lower by 8.4%. Turning to the bond markets, the U.S. 10-year yield is trading 32 basis points lower at 0.45%, 14 basis points higher than the intraday low, with the 10-year German bond yield at 12 basis points lower at -0.83%. In the FX space, the Bloomberg Dollar Index is down by 0.1%, with the Japanese yen and Swiss franc rallying sharply on haven flows, and the Norwegian krona and Canadian dollar leading the G10 laggards, both down sharply with the collapse in oil prices. It's a fairly quiet calendar in terms of European economic data today, with the weekly Swiss sight deposits in focus for any hints at S&B FX intervention last week, in addition to the Eurozone Investor Conference for March. In terms of central bank speakers, the ECB's reign speaks today. That's it from me. For more macro breaking news, it's SQUA Go on the Bloomberg Terminal. Roger?
Thanks so much indeed, Richard. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Leanne Gerrans with more on what's going on around the world. Leanne.
Roger, good morning. Reports from Riyadh say Saudi authorities have begun releasing royal family members and other officials who were detained in a security clampdown. The arrests were ordered by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and included a brother and a nephew of his father, King Salman. At least 2 of the detainees have been accused of treason. Observers say the prince's move shows his concerns about potential challenges matters within his own family. Police in Hong Kong have arrested 17 people in connection with suspected homemade explosive devices. 12 men and 5 women are being held after weekend raids on 22 properties in the city. Police say they recovered about 1.5 kilos of explosives and a large amount of chemicals. Improvised bombs exploded at 3 locations in Hong Kong between late January and early February. And finally, major supermarkets here in the UK have started rationing some products after shoppers began panic buying over coronavirus fears. Asda, Tesco and Ocado are restricting a variety of things like dry pasta, tinned vegetables, hand wash, soap and toilet roll. On Friday, the government promised that the public will continue to have the food and supplies they do need. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Tech by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg. Caroline.
Thank you so much, Leanne Gerrans there. Well, we're sort of seeing firsthand, certainly over the weekend, what panic does and whether that actually kind of means that we end up talking ourselves into a recession, which is really dangerous.
Well, I think I didn't feel panicked. I don't know how everyone else did until you actually go into the supermarket. And then there does seem to be a panic that's whipping up lately.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
let's see what happens.
Yeah, the government no doubt will reinforce the message today that consumers should remain calm, that the supermarkets have it under control. Joining us in our London studio, Markets Live strategist Laura Cooper. You're nodding your head. Laura, good morning. Look, away from the kind of supermarket issue and consumers, let's just talk about the markets, shall we? Because we gave the breaking numbers as European stocks opened this morning. US stock 600 down by over 6%. We're looking potentially at bear markets for most of the big European equity markets. Also in the bond markets here in Europe, we've seen a significant repricing. Italian BTPs jumped 21 basis points. German bond yields slumped 11 basis points. Are we pricing in recession for Europe now?
Well, I think what we're seeing is just this broader flight to safety at this stage. That's why we're seeing just the spreads with France, Italy, Spain, Portugal. They're all widening against the German bund yield. So quite sharply over the initial period of time. And yes, I would say that markets are certainly pricing for a significant contraction in growth going forward.
And not just in Europe, but in the US as well. We're seeing obviously the extraordinary moment where both 30 years and 10 years treasuries under 1%. Never happened before. I mean, again, potential for a US recession?
I think certainly that's what markets are alluding to. Just the extreme pace of the drop that we're seeing in yields today. I mean, 40 basis point drop on the 10-year alone is quite exceptional in one session. So that is certainly points to a market that is begging for some kind of coordinated policy action from central bankers for greater fiscal stimulus. And if we begin to see these financial conditions tighten even further throughout today's session, we would likely see more of an emergency coordinated action, some rate cuts coming through, likely before the Fed meeting on the 17th and the 18th.
Yeah, very interesting. Obviously, the ECB meeting on Thursday. Look, just to take me to, though, the Italian FTSE MIB. So Italy, the centre, really, of the coronavirus, the worst of the coronavirus outbreak in Europe. So, we were obviously eyes, laser focused on the Italian stock market open, but it looked very sort of slow at the start. And then it turns out that actually very few stocks are being traded. Obviously, Milan is one of the cities in lockdown. We're now down 3.8% in terms of Italian stocks, but that's not as bad as elsewhere.
Well, I think when we look at the FTSE MIB, when we look at from its February peaks, it's actually down a lot more sharply than the broader European indices.
Yes.
And so there's likely some catch up that's playing through there. I would expect that some containment measures in Italy has likely assuaged some fears of the spread, whereas we have yet to see that priced fully into the European markets. But certainly going forward today, the fact that Italy's economy is essentially a large part of it is shut down. It is Europe's third largest economy. It's the world's eighth largest economy. So I would expect pressure to build there, notably as we begin to see this greater sell-off pressure across Europe.
And of course, what's driving a lot of this is what's going on in the oil market. And more interestingly, really, in the last half hour or so, we've seen both Brent and WTI stay above $30 the barrel. We saw certainly WTI below that point. Is sense perhaps that the bounce was too big?